Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of LBMC Cybersecurity Sense. This is your host, William Parks, with Kyle Hunterberg and Andy Kerr. And we're back again with yet another, and I think I do this emphasis every time, yet another PCI episode, but this time it's for October. How you gentlemen doing today?
Doing great.
Excellent.
Happy Halloween.
It is Halloween.
Yeah, we're making this recording on Halloween. That's right.
Super spooky, huh? Hey, I think that because it's the 31st, we qualify this as the month of October PCI episode. So we're on the very last day.
Sounds good to me.
All right, guys. So in past episodes, we've hit every requirement up to requirement 6. So this episode is going to be requirement 7, or through requirement 6. This is requirement 7 today. And in good old fashion, we usually start off with the news. So also in good old fashion, Kyle, I'll let you kick off the news and let us know what's good, what's happening.
Sure thing. In the news, it's something, it came out a little while ago, but I don't think we've had a chance to chat about it on here yet. And that's, in the world of PCI, there's, the two ways that you can report. Either the full ROC, that report on compliance, and that's where you generally need a QSA to come help you. Or there's the SAQ, self-assessment questionnaires that, you can have a QSA help you, or you can, fill those out yourself. And the SAQs, there's, kind of several different flavors, and each of them are, targeted at a specific payment channel. Like an SAQ-A is for an e-commerce merchant that uses an iframe or a redirect to kind of keep their scope as small as possible. But that list of all those different types of SAQs has been somewhat static for a while. But this year, there's a new SAQ. There's SAQ SPOC or SPOC, which is one of the awesome things with IT in that it's an acronym inside of an acronym. And so SPOC is Software Pin Entry on COTS Solution, and COTS is commercial off the shelf. And so basically what it's meaning is that the easy thing to think about would be using like a Square device. I'm sure most everyone has been to a coffee shop or, some small merchant where they have, some little Square device or, through another vendor that's plugged into their phone or into their tablet, and they're using that, and you dip or you tap your card on that little device. And so this is now a brand new SAQ specifically for those types of, payment acceptance to give the right kinds of requirements for them to adhere to.
All right. And so wow. Yeah, that's definitely a lot more than we had last time for sure. Last episode, I think it was just, there's not much that's really changed. So
it's one of those things that odds are for, the high majority of people, it's not going to change anything, but if you happen to be, a merchant out there, likely you're going to be a smaller merchant if you're using one of these, and this is going to be the only way. But if you are, and you have historically been using, like a full SAQD and just trying to reduce the requirements so that you're not doing everything, now you have this, specific SAQ. So again, if you're using, some type of a device, it's plugged into your phone, it's plugged in, or a tablet, it's going to generally be something like that. And again, it's this SAQ type, it's similar to the SAQ P2PE, where you need to be using a validated listed solution. So if you go to the PCI Council's website, you can go on there and look up all the approved P2PE solutions that would allow you to use an SAQ P2PE. That's the same for the SAQ SPOC. You have to go on there and look up a certified solution, and if you're using one of those, then you can proceed to use this SAQ and reduce those requirements. It's looking at it, it's really only portions of requirement 3, 8, 9, and 12. So it's a pretty simple assessment if you qualify for being able to use it.
Perfect. Awesome. Well, we just knocked that out. That's great. All right. So I guess that's all the news that we have for today. Perfect. Yep. All right. Well, without further ado, we'll kick off into requirement 7. Restrict access to system components and cardholder data by business need to know. So, gentlemen.
I don't know about you, and I was just going to say quickly, I feel like requirement 7 is on both sides one of the easiest and hardest requirements to follow because it's almost all soft controls and just requires processes and policies and procedures. And so it's really easy to put all those in place, but it's really hard to actually follow them.
Interesting.
Yeah, I was going to say exactly something very similar. I think a lot of people take requirement 7 and requirement 8 and tend to intermingle them quite a bit. I mean, again, and there's quite a bit of crossover between requirement 7 and requirement 8, and especially when it comes to procedures and assigning access. And okay, well, we're assigning access, and here's your least privilege. Okay, well, we need to make sure we're setting up passwords and all this other kind of stuff to kind of go along with it. So it's easy to do, but Drew, I would say that I would feel like most people too tend to breeze past requirement 7. And with 4.0, I think that's changing a little bit, because there's going to be a couple of things that we're going to go over here in a second that's going to require a little bit more thought, a little bit more action on by part of the different cybersecurity operations folks. So it's going to take a little bit more effort than it has in previous years.
Yeah, absolutely. And to your point, 7's always been one of the shortest requirements in general, and it still is, but it's probably has the most amount of change by percentage based on the size it was to the size it is now with the 4.0 changes. So yeah, it's
Agreed.
Definitely one that if you haven't been paying close attention to it in the past or kind of skipping through it, you really have to look at it closer. And at a very high level, basically you can get through 7 if you just use least privileged access and kind of a need to know setup. That's all you need to do. And if you're doing that perfectly, then you're probably good for requirement 7. But again, the devil's in the details there to actually do it. And like when you're laying that out, least privileged, if you're actually doing that. And like another thing that I feel like organizations try to do, but in practice, I don't see them doing it as well as they think they are. And that's using role-based accounts. That's really what you need to be doing to comply with 7 is you should have, role-based access control and really have those roles defined and have users assigned to the roles and then divvying out your access that way. Not just saying, oh, we just hired Bob, he's replacing Joe, so we're just going to do a copy Bob's, Joe's account, and that'll be Bob's new account, and everything that Joe had access to is what Bob's going to have access to, because we have no idea what he had access to. And it just becomes this never-ending mess of trying to figure out, every time someone changes position, they get these new rights, you don't take away their old rights. And if you're doing that, it's impossible to say you're doing role-based access.
And so just because I want to interject something here really quick, because, I have to drop the industry term, but if someone were to say, hey, we do zero trust kind of methodology here, would that qualify for this? Would that essentially take this and pretty much make everything okay?
It could, to a degree, of how you're doing zero trust. Zero trust is probably going to get more into requirement 8 because that lays out more so the actual, access control mechanisms and, authentication mechanisms. And so that's probably where zero trust would play, more importantly. 7 is more about the kind of the thought process around how you're divvying out accounts and who has access to what. So, technically you could have, zero trust, but still be giving a user admin access into your AWS console, which you probably don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that, I have several large clients that I deal with on an annual basis. And I will say most mature entities, I feel like have got a hold on this. They assign very specific tickets to, hey, here's, to your point, Bob, he just got hired on. We're assigning him a standard user ID, and every single bit of access that he has to get will have to have a separate ticket. And then that separate ticket is assigned to a manager, and that manager then says, yes, this person can have it. And then it's sent to that group. And then that group has to sign off on it as well. So I would say that I haven't found this much of a problem in large entities. The specific scenario that Kyle was talking about just a second ago, I usually find this in like small and medium sized entities that don't have a large group that can attend to all these tickets. They're looking for a quick fix. Hey, you know what? This is fine. I'm just going to copy and paste this over, and here's the same. He's the same job. So it's all good. So yeah, but those more mature, yeah, it does happen.
I'm laughing,
and I'm sure it's
it's
fine,
the same thing.
Fine.
In those small entities, sometimes you go in and it's like, hey, for requirement 7, prove to me that Joe is authorized to have the access that he does. And like the the security head or whatever might be like, well, of course he does. He's Joe. He's worked here for 20 years or whatever. And it's like, well, where's the ticket that shows that he's actually approved to have this? And a lot of times that might not exist because they just didn't bother to do that. It's 20 people and they all know each other, and so that's one of the places where PCI can be kind of a pain in the butt for small organizations when they have to make sure they have all those tickets and checks and balances in place.
And to be perfectly honest, and let's be real here, guys. I mean, we've all seen it. We know what happens. You'll go have that one guy that's been with the company for 20 years and he's made up into some sort of high-level executive office, and he never wants to let go of his access to all those other areas he worked in as he was moving through the company, and he takes it personally when all of a sudden you have to say, I'm sorry, we got to cut your access. You don't, you are now the CTO. You don't need, access to the firewalls. You don't need access to the Active Directory anymore. You're a CTO, so it can sometimes be a delicate subject when you're talking with certain people. I mean, but it has to be done. It's part of best practice and a part of PCI as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of those things that kind of will help that potentially, and it's one of the changes for 4.0, is that now you're going to have a process to do user recertifications, which has never existed before in PCI, but now going forward, at least every 6 months, you're going to have to go in and kind of review all the users in your, in scope network, specifically like the CDE, and make sure that all of those accounts have the appropriate privileges and have someone sign off on that. So if you do have that CTO, he's going to have to put his, get, possibly the CEO to say, yeah, he actually needs access to the firewalls, but that'll probably be a hard conversation and might be a good opportunity to say, yeah, you don't really need that anymore. You haven't signed in 5 years.
And this could be terrifying. This is to folks that are part of large entities. You've got a ton of different administrators that have access into the CDE. You have third parties that have access into your CDE for whatever reason. They're contractors or whatever. Trying to review all that access every 6 months, it can be a job. And so there are lots of tools out there to kind of assist in that process, especially for those large entities that have a lot of folks to do that. I would highly recommend that those that should be well into preparation for 4.0 at this time be looking at tools that can assist you with that review process.
Identity and access management tools are pivotal.
I used to work at a large organization, and we had an old mainframe system that we had to do access recertifications for SOX compliance. And I got the fun job of running that, and thousands of users. It would take me 2 to 3 months at least to go through that user recertification, to reach out, break out all the users, find their managers, and then harass them, endlessly until I got them to say, yeah, that access is approved or not. So I totally feel the pain on that one. I know it's going to be tough, but if you haven't started, start working on that now. So hopefully by the time, 2025 gets here and that's a requirement, you have an easy process, or at least easier.
One of the things that may help with that, and again, I haven't seen, there's not been any specific guidelines that have come out other than the 4.0 itself. So PC hasn't put in any supporting documentation, but using something like a privilege access manager, or PAM. So the ability to say, all right, these are the only accounts that can get into the CDE. Everything else are just standard Active Directory accounts. Do you have access into PAM? And then you have to check out the username and password. I feel like this would be a helpful tool to say, all right, well, these are the only accounts that can get into our CDE that are inside of PAM. So these are the ones that we have to access, that we have to review every 6 months. So I think this would kind of help in that process. But again, it just depends on the size of your entity and how, to Kyle's point, if you have thousands of accounts, are we talking about 10 accounts that have access?
Yeah, and I would agree that if you don't have, some type of a PAM solution, as next month when we jump into requirement 8, there's a couple of new requirements there too, that where using a good PAM solution is going to make your life easier. So if you don't have one, I definitely think just with the security as it stands right now, that's almost a requirement, or becoming kind of just like a minimal standard, that you need to have some type of a PAM solution in place to really help you divvy out those administrative administrative credentials.
Yeah, and I tell you, oh, go ahead, Kyle.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say this one seems scary. And depending on how your environment is utilizing different system level application accounts, the next new one can be just damn near terrifying. Let's just be honest. And that's the application and system accounts. So there has to be now a review of the application and system accounts. Now, there's a little bit of a caveat to that. Just like, making sure that privilege is assigned accordingly, there 7.2.5 talks about, the system and application accounts, but in the very next kind of subsection, as it were, the frequency in which that is done is based off of the new buzzword that's going to be in PCI, and that's the targeted risk analysis. So, in many of the new requirements, as we've talked about, anytime you see periodically, something has to be done periodically, then there has to be a targeted risk analysis that defines what is periodically to that particular environment. So there will have to be that needs to be done to review how often those system and application accounts are reviewed. Now, and guys, this as well as I do, folks that have lots of different processes around payments and applications, this can really get out of hand really quickly, because then there's those application accounts that have been sitting there, they're the legacy, they've been there forever. We're going to have to go through and dig and try to find all these application accounts. So this can be quite a process.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that's going to be hard, because I always historically have found it so weird that PCI before 4.0 had no requirements that specifically looked at system or application accounts. And I've had numerous times when I've had clients like, hey, we have these system accounts, what do we have to do for them? And it's like, well, you should be doing this, but if you look through the requirements, it doesn't say you necessarily have to, depending on how you read that. But now, there's these requirements that specifically say system and application accounts. And so getting that all under control is going to be another heavy lift for a lot of organizations.
That's a beast right there.
Yeah.
That is a beast.
So often people are like, we have, these 35 system or, accounts, and they all, they're just automatic. They're just doing these things, and I don't really know what they're doing, but they're just doing them. And it's like, now you have to tell me what they're doing, why they're doing it, who owns them, what their password is, what the length of the password is, when was the last time their password was changed. All of that has to be, documented and understood.
Poor.
And what I found interesting was is that and it doesn't say it in requirement 7. It says it in requirement 8. In requirement 7, it just says system and application accounts. In requirement 7, in requirement 8, it actually calls out interactive accounts. So requirement 7 does not make a distinguishment to say, hey, you only have to review access to interactive accounts. These is all system and application accounts have to be reviewed, all of them. And so, I go back to the whole. There are some tools, I can't remember the name of it. I've seen several that will kind of help you track down application and system accounts, and so you go, hey, what are running here? What are running there? You could probably use something that Will's probably familiar with, is Bloodhound, to try to track down accounts.
Oh yeah.
If you ran that.
Oh yeah. If you're gonna, I'm gonna caution everybody. If you decide to do that, you need to let your security team know, because they will get flagged for it, most certainly, and then they're gonna come to you.
I saw a security team run Bloodhound on their own systems, trying to track down accounts. And so it was kind of funny to see that, they're running it on their own internal systems to say, hey, look, this is I didn't know this account was even there anymore. We thought we got rid of this years ago. So again, there are other tools to do it, but I've seen people use Bloodhound to kind of track down accounts too.
If you can do that, the Bloodhound is fantastic.
I would say in general, for these new ones, it's another place where more than likely, if you have a privileged access management solution or you're looking into one, a lot of them can also do, system account, and help you with that and do password rotations and all of that through that PAM solution. So just another good reason where you might want to look into, some type of a tool like that. It's going to likely make your life way easier than trying to manually track all of those.
I mean, if
Absolutely.
you're going to manually do it, you may as well just pull sticks. Whoever gets the shortest end. Poor Bob, who just got brought on, gets all the grunt work over here. Going to go through all the accounts.
Well, we have all been there. We've all been the grunt guys too. Yeah, it only seems fair to keep giving that type of job. Hey, it's the intern.
Hey, time to do it. We've been saving this all year for you. Oh man, that's great. But yeah, okay, so I do want to go back to the word periodically and how that was kind of defined. So with the specifics behind defining periodically, is that what you guys would essentially step in and do? You guys define what that period would be? Who does that?
So that's a great question. So there was a conversation that we had internally. PCI has become very specific on who does what. Even if, as you see in the policies and procedures, they want define who the person is that is responsible for requirement 1, requirement 2, requirement 3. Kind of going through all these different ones. Now, the targeted risk analysis, PCI hasn't said specifically who does that within your internal entity yet. However, I would say that if you're over IAM. And I would say that you should be the one that is ultimately responsible doing that targeted risk analysis that defines that, because you can't really have someone in governance. They're not going to really necessarily understand the risk behind how often those accounts need to be reviewed. So ultimately, when it comes to the sign off of that targeted risk analysis, my recommendation is to say whoever is over that group, whoever ultimately the buck stops with in that particular department, needs to be the one that's performing that targeted risk analysis with the guidance with somebody from governance, that is kind of, working through the PCI project and so forth and so on. So that would be my recommendation for somebody to define that.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, and as far, Will, as it comes to like Andy and I, when we come into an organization, we just to some degree have to accept what they've determined, but we have to also make sure what they've determined is, feasible and, makes sense. So if we come in and they say, we've chosen periodically to be every 100 years, we're going to likely call bogus on that and tell them to rethink that. But if they tell us it's something reasonable, like maybe it's every 6 months or maybe it's even every 2 years, because they're allowed in this one to also adjust their password length accordingly, because that's where too they have to now have a defined password length for these system accounts. And so maybe they have a 25 character password length and they change those passwords every year. But maybe for that periodically they have 50 characters or 100 character passwords, and so they increase that periodicity, and they're allowed to take that into account. And so that's what Andy and I would get to do, is just kind of verify that what they're doing makes sense. And we do have it within our authority to say we're not going to accept that you do this every 100 years, because that just doesn't make any sense.
But then did that make our lives easier? We wouldn't have to hire anybody.
I can see the argument being made that you're not going to want to review these system and application accounts every 6 months, much like what you would do with a standard, admin account. I get that 100%. That makes sense to Kyle's point. Annually, the system, and if you've taken into all these things, I could almost understand an even longer length of time if it was a situation where, hey, we've got 25, 30 character passwords on these system and application accounts. Okay, all right, I can get behind that. Again, it's just what's reasonable.
Yeah, and I mean the idea behind this too is for security purposes, right? And security changes, as we all know, very, very quickly. It can happen in a day. So I think that's another reason too why having a reasonable amount of time to review this stuff. If you haven't thought about it for a while and something does happen, then you're kind of forced to go back and say, oh shoot, we forgot that was set to that, so we need to change that really fast, or we need to update this, or we need to revoke access to this one account that's now compromised, or whatever it may be. So anyway, so I guess next up is what, 7.3?
Yeah, and that's 7.3 is pretty easy. It's just that you need to have your access controlled via access control systems at a high level, and so that's just making sure that you do actually have the hard controls, and that gets a little bit more into then 8. But just calling it out that while you have these policies and procedures all set, there is then a system that backs that up.
Perfect.
And I would say, to kind of tack onto this, Kyle mentioned at the beginning, 7 is very short. but the those main requirements that are new this year, for 4.0, are going to make a pivotal difference. If you can third party out a lot of this to other folks, like folks that have e-commerce, that you can use an iframe or a redirect to a third party to take this out of your hands, hey, great. There would still be some additional requirements in there, but try to find ways to make your environment smaller. Get rid of the cardholder data if all possible. Reduce the risk, and this is going to take care of a lot of these problems for you. However, if you decide to move forward and bring in everything internally, it's going to be a challenge. And so I encourage folks to seek out a QSA, LBMC. We're ready and available to help you with a gap analysis to work through these things, try to find solutions to help you out. Look into third-party service providers that can kind of outsource some of this work for you if you're a small environment and there's just no way that you can do this. So there's a lot of options out there, and I think it's good to get an expert in this field to kind of guide you through that.
Absolutely.
Perfect. And I guess one quick little question from me. So I know we just covered requirement 7. Does this apply to customer and or cardholder accounts, or is it more just organizational?
Yeah, that's a question that I've had, people ask me specifically, like, hey, I am, I have a website and my customers can log in and they, log into the website to make payments and all of that. Do all these account controls, apply there? And the answer is no. For those customer, cardholder accounts, these requirements are not meant to follow them. Some of them might be best practices that you might want to do. I personally have seen very few websites or anything like that I sign into that requires me to change my password. Or do anything like that. It could make sense depending on the security involved and all of that. But at the end of the day, PCI is not going to mandate it. These requirement 7 is specifically for the user accounts within your organization.
Ultimately, if you think about it like this, if you apply this kind of logic to it, PCI is meant, the very spirit of PCI is the prevention of release of bulk cardholder data. This is why there's that caveat in 3.2.1, I believe it's in 4.0 as well, is that, the individual cashier that's one credit card at a time, that's not the person that they're concerned about. They're concerned about those administrators that have access to bulk cardholder, the hundreds, thousands of cards. That's the kind of thing they're looking for.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's where, like in this case, obviously you want to protect your user accounts, and you don't want, I definitely wouldn't recommend anyone have, a 5-character password policy for your users, that are just signing into your website. Again, that wouldn't break PCI, but it's, just going to be a horrible security practice, and you want to, protect your users, and that way someone isn't logging in and stealing their information or leveraging their credit card in a way. So you still want to follow best practices for kind of IAM around them, but it's generally not going to fall into the scope of your PCI assessment.
Absolutely.
I was about to say, if you want to set a 5-character password requirement, I would thank you quite a lot from a hacker's perspective. I would be very thankful. You would get it easier to feed the family.
Throw in the password cracker. And
that's right. Yeah, get it done in about 5 seconds. All right, gentlemen. So any parting words before we kind of wrap this up today? We've kind of hit everything. We've done a full encompassing, 7 wasn't very long, so it was pretty straightforward, easy to address. Nothing to add.
The biggest thing to me is, if you're interested in 7 here, just wait till 8. That's really the meat of IAM, in my opinion. Again, I feel like 7 is, set up all your policies for how you control your accounts, and then 8 is, where the rubber hits the road and how you actually do it. So I feel like next month is really going to be a good one as far as that goes.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, you heard it first, everybody. 7 was your warm up. Get ready to have 8 for the real workout here. The real work begins. Thank you guys so much for listening to LBMC Cybersecurity Sense, and we will see you guys again next month.